Welcome back to The World Over Live. Pope Francis's first trip abroad to World Youth Day in Rio was a rousing success last week. Then, during the 12-hour flight back to Rome on Monday, the Pope spoke to reporters on board for about 80 minutes, answering questions about the gay lobby, the role of women in the church, his own security issues while in Rio, and much more. To unpack what the Pope really said, and to react to some of the coverage, I'm joined by a dynamic duo of Jesuits, founder and editor of Ignatius Press, Father Joseph Fessio, and Bishop of Madison, Wisconsin, His Excellency Robert Morlino. Thank you both for being with us. They join us via satellite from Napa, California. Now, listen, while on the plane, the Pope entertained a question about this much-discussed gay lobby operating at the Vatican. I want to share this quote with both Father and the Bishop and the audience. He said, and he said directly, "So much has been written about the gay lobby. I've yet to find on a Vatican identity card the word gay. They say there are some gay people here. I think that when we encounter a gay person, we must make the distinction between the fact of a person being gay and the fact of a lobby, because lobbies are not good, they are bad. If a person is gay and seeks the Lord and has goodwill, who am I to judge that person?" And then he went on and he said, the Catechism of the Catholic Church explains this very well. It says we must not marginalize these persons, they must be integrated into society. The problem is not that one has this homosexual tendency. No, we must be brothers. This is the first matter. There is also another problem. Another one. The problem is to form a lobby of those who have this tendency. A lobby of the greedy people, a lobby of politicians, a lobby of Masons, so many lobbies. This is the most serious problem for me. Father Fessio, Bishop Morlino, is this a change in church teaching as has been suggested in so many of the media reports? Is the Pope saying homosexuals are not only welcome, but somehow the church is changing its teaching regarding them?
Well, the bishop can speak authoritatively here, but as a mere theologian and Jesuit, I'll say that he said nothing which is not identical with what's in the Catechism. The only thing that might have caused some problem is he used the word gay in a more generic sense. I'm not sure he's aware of how in the English-speaking world the word gay really means a homosexual who's lobbying. That is, someone who's homosexual with that tendency but is living a chaste life and recognizes the difficulty, doesn't usually identify himself as a gay or herself as a gay.
Mm-hmm. Bishop Morlino,
Raymond, I would just want to add, by way of a kind of a context, we all know pretty well now that after the Second Vatican Council, the mass media conspired with certain individuals within the church and outside the church to bring about a certain spirit of Vatican II, to concoct the spirit as opposed to what actually happened in the council. And I think what's going on now with all of this media hullabaloo is that the same sorts of people are trying to concoct a spirit of Pope Francis rather than the real Pope Francis. And I think that underlies a lot of these misunderstandings.
Raymond, if I could add a bit more
Go ahead. Let me just throw this out, and then I'm going to let you comment, okay. Father Fessio. There is certainly, though, a tonal shift here, a shift in emphasis, yes?
Well, okay. Look at this. The Pope refused to give any interview on the way to Rio, but he gave a 121-minute interview on the way back. Now, I think that was shrewd. If he'd given that interview on the way, the whole World Youth Day, all those days would have been dominated by one or two comments. After that interview, 121 minutes, how many minutes does it take to read the part on homosexuals? Maybe 30 seconds. But that was what the newspapers and the media focused on. It's completely blown out of proportion. So that, I think, is a problem. But it's also true that because he's outgoing and he wants to speak, in a truthful way and in a responsive way, he's not reading from notes. He answered all the questions, didn't refuse a single question. I mean, that's a beautiful thing. But you know, that's not magisterial. That's not the teaching of the church coming out of a cockpit or of the, you know, the first class, you know, section of an airplane. I mean, I call them aerial bombs, but it's good to have them say that, and it creates a certain interest in what the Catholic Church does think on things. But you can't hold a 2,000-year-old church to a remark made at, you know, 40,000 feet of altitude. To a bunch of reporters.
I want to play something for you. This is Father James Martin, who is himself a Jesuit, editor of America Magazine, editor-at-large. Here's what he had to say, reflecting on this. I'd like your reactions.
I think it's a very pastoral approach. He's even using the word gay, which has not been used before. I mean, they would always use words like homosexual, same-sex attraction, very clinical words. He's doing that. He's speaking, and when you hear him speaking, it's a very pastoral tone. And he's saying, as you know, you said before, who am I to judge, which we have not heard ever. And the other thing was he has not sort of appended that statement with something negative. He hasn't said, well, gays are welcome in the church, but you know, it was a purely positive, welcoming argument, and he quotes the Catechism by saying they shouldn't be marginalized. So I was stunned, and I think most of the reporters on the plane were stunned too.
Your reaction to that?
Well, I would say, Raymond, that people may well have been stunned, but what we're talking about here is an emotional reaction to something. And it's very good to go positive rather than to go negative. I don't think for a minute that Pope Benedict was going as negative as he is portrayed now as having been. I don't believe that at all. But I think to go positive is a good thing, and I think the Holy Father, in reaching out in that way and clearly saying what the teaching of the Church is. If a person has a good will, that means they will what is good. And if a homosexual person wills what is good, then the homosexual person wills his or her own chastity. And that's the issue of concern, the behavior, rather than the fact that they find themselves homosexual.
Father Fessio, what is the catechetical teaching on homosexuality that the Pope is referencing here in full context?
Now, Raymond, why do you ask me when I'm sitting next to an official teacher of the Church?
Well, you're the publisher of UCAT and the Catechism, so I figured you're more than qualified.
I see. But I have looking over my shoulder. I'd be careful what I say here. No, it's very clear what the Catechism teaches, namely that same-sex attraction is a disorder, not a sin, not certain what the causes are, but it's a disorder. And acting upon it is sinful. And the Pope said nothing to undo that. At the same time, and in the same paragraph, the Catechism says we have to respect people with this same-sex attraction as human persons with the dignity of all human persons. They can't be discriminated against as a person. Therefore, they must be welcome insofar as they're part of the human family. But what they choose to do can be judged. If they choose to act upon these tendencies in a way that's contrary to what God's plan is in the moral law, then we can judge that as being sinful or wrong.
No, as I told a reporter this week, whether someone's having sex outside of marriage and they're straight or they're gay, it's both sinful behaviors, and the Church has always called it as such. I mean, this isn't as if it's singling out gay people and allowing everybody else a free pass. Now, the Pope also spoke about women and their role in the Church. First, on the question of the ordination of women, he was very clear. Here's what he said. On the ordination of women, the Church has spoken and said no. John Paul II, in a definitive formulation, said the door is closed. Your thoughts on this and the clarity of this reaction?
Well, from what I've heard about Pope Francis, Raymond, I've never met him, but from what I've heard about him, he's a very decisive and clear and prayerful Jesuit. And again, his overwhelming kindness in terms of dealing with people is the context within which such a quote has to be taken. And he was just showing respect, loving respect for people by telling them the truth. And I believe that that is his style. I mean, depending on the circumstances and so on, I think the impression is being given that he wants to shy away from certain things. He would rather present positively than negatively. Granted, so would I.
Yeah.
But at the same time, when the chips are down, I think in as loving a way as he can, he's going to, as it were, say it like it is.
Father Fessio, he then went on and said he called for a deeper theology related to women in the church. And here's what he said. A church without women would be like an apostolic college without Mary. The Madonna is more important than the apostles. The church herself is feminine, the spouse of Christ and a mother. The role of women doesn't end just with being a mother and with housework. We don't yet have a truly deep theology of women in the church. We talk about whether they can do this or that. Can they be altar girls? Can they be lectors? About a woman as a president of Caritas? But we don't have a deep theology of women in the church. What do you think he means by that?
Well, first of all, Raymond, I don't like as a Jesuit or as a Catholic to criticize the Pope. I'm not sure theology is his forte, or he has a great grasp of the whole history of theology. But as a matter of fact, there's a very deep theology of women in the church that goes all the way back to the fathers of the church in the Middle Ages. De Lubac has a wonderful book called The Motherhood of the Church, on the feminine characteristics of the church. Von Balthasar has written volumes on this. I don't think Pope Francis has had time to read all those, and so maybe he's not aware of them. But I would say there is already a very profound theology of women in the church, and the church as feminine, the church as woman, but it needs to be made more widely known, which is why, Raymond, we have Ignatius Press.
Oh, now, how did I know a commercial was coming? I could feel it building.
Well played.
Look, there was another major story this week, really it was a story last week, about a Monsignor Battista Ricca, who is Pope Francis appointed to the Vatican Bank. Now, Sandro Magister, who's a great Vaticanista journalist, alleges in a L'Espresso article that Ricca engaged in homosexual activity while serving in the nunciature in Uruguay, and he scandalized officials there reportedly. The Pope responded in this way when asked about this. He said, I ordered an investigation brevia, and that investigation found nothing. Many times we seem to seek out the sins of somebody's youth and publish them. We're not talking about crimes, which are something else. The abuse of minors, for instance, is a crime. But one can sin and then convert, and the Lord both forgives and forgets. We don't have the right to refuse to forget. It's dangerous. The theology of sin is important. St. Peter committed one of the greatest sins, denying Christ, and yet they made him Pope. Think about that. What do you expect to happen here in this case of this Monsignor?
Well, number one, Raymond, this is a good quote because notice how he simply takes for granted that homosexual activity is a sin. And a person can convert and be forgiven. So that gives you a key into his real understanding of homosexuality. There's something wrong with it, but you can convert and you can be forgiven. So that should be the context for these other remarks about, gay friendliness. But notice he said the initial investigation found nothing. Sandro Magister is a pretty solid man with a lot of evidence. And he's gone out on a limb. I doubt he would have made his statements, and I read his column on this, unless there was pretty substantial evidence. And part of the problem could be that the Pope, in the first brief investigation, didn't find anything because it had been expunged. Because in the Vatican channels there, these reports didn't get through.
Yeah,
so
that
we'll
seems
see.
to be Magister's assertion.
Yeah, either he's innocent and these are false, which is fine to be cleared, or he's guilty and it hasn't been found out yet and it will be found out. One of the two things. So we'll see. Yeah. And if he's guilty of that but is truly repentant, well, then he can be forgiven and it can be forgotten.
Bishop Morlino,
it takes time, Ray.
Go ahead.
I would just say it takes time to conduct a thorough canonical investigation. I've had to do several myself about various things. And one cannot, within say a month or whatever, one can follow the procedures, but one doesn't necessarily get to the bottom of the matter right the first time one follows those procedures. And usually one question leads to another, and those procedures become more extended. I would call the investigation that the Holy Father did the preliminary investigation. And I would think that that preliminary investigation would yield further questions that then the Holy Father and his collaborators would attend to.
Yeah, and from these comments, it looks like he's even open to closing the Vatican Bank entirely.
Yes, and back on the other question, Raymond, I would hope either that Ricca is found innocent and therefore the false allegations are shown to be false, or if it turns out that these are true allegations but didn't reach the Pope, then there needs to be a second investigation of how who blocked them, who took them out of the record, you know, who was it that was preventing the Pope from seeing this? Because that is as bad a problem as what the allegations are making themselves.
Before I get to some other very interesting comments the Pope made that got virtually no coverage about divorced and remarried Catholics, we're getting some emails and they're suggesting, they wanted me to ask you all, are you surprised that the Pope raised the question of a Masonic lobby? Did that surprise you at all?
I was surprised, but I think the situation in Europe is a much more serious matter than it is in the United States. In general, there are Masonic lodges historically in Europe that have been into some very nefarious kinds of activity. I don't know what the situation is in Latin America at all, but it did seem strange as an American to hear that Masonic lobby listed among the others. It did surprise me.
Let's go on then and look at these other comments the Pope made, and this was about divorced and remarried Catholics. He said, I believe this is a time of mercy, a change of epoch. It is a kairos moment of mercy in terms of communion for those who have divorced and remarried. It has to be seen within the larger pastoral context of marriage. When the Council of 8 Cardinals meet October 1st through the 3rd, one of the things we'll consider is how to move forward with the pastoral care of marriage. Also, just 15 days ago or so, I met the Secretary of the Synod of Bishops, and maybe it will also focus on the pastoral care of marriage. It's complicated. How are you reading those comments, Father Fessio?
Well, there are some additional comments which are important, too, on that subject. He did say that being divorced and receiving communion and the sacraments is all right. It's being divorced and then attempting a remarriage, which is the problem, and that he was very clear that that can't be done unless there's an annulment. His other comments said that in a circumstance where a couple is certain that the marriage really never took place, but they don't have enough proof to make it clear to the tribunal, then there may be a pastoral solution for them. But again, that presupposes that there was never a marriage. So from everything he said, and again, this is off the cuff, but it was very precise, it seemed to me, he still is holding very clearly to the Church's teaching that once you're married, you are married, and if you attempt another marriage, you're no longer in full communion with the Church and can't receive the sacraments. Now, mercy, yes. Pastoral attempts to deal with those situations, yes. But he didn't seem, to me anyway, to give any indication that he was in any way deviating from the Church's traditional teaching on this.
And Raymond, he has also said repeatedly that the protection of the family is one of his major concerns as the Bishop of Rome, as the Supreme Pontiff. And certainly the protection of marriage would indicate that weakening of our position on the indissolubility of marriage would not be one of the ways to protect the family. And I think the Holy Father is very, very serious about family. And, well, we all need to be in these days.
Before I let you go, could you step back for a moment and tell me what are your impressions 6 months into this papacy and watching the Pope in Rio, listening to the full context of his messages as well as these comments to the press? What is the takeaway? What is this approach to the papacy and how does it differ from his predecessors?
Well, I would just say that I've been looking at various interpretations of where Pope Francis might be coming from. And I tend to think myself that he is a crafty old Jesuit, as one author put it, who is even using the press to elicit a certain discussion about issues at a very serious level. He has a gift for getting the attention of the world in terms of his charisma, in terms of his savvy with people. He has a gift for bringing issues to the surface and initiating the dialogue on a very broad scale. And I think that is a perhaps great difference, that he really captures people's attention. But I think in the end, we should always presume that the Pope is Catholic, obviously.
Yeah,
and
that's a good presumption.
Some of the things that are being written almost presume that he's not really Catholic.
Yeah, yeah, I agree.
And what they're claiming, he's implying and insinuating.
Father Fessio?
Raymond, I remember Father de Lubac, when he was my mentor, said something which stuck with me, that no people are more like Christ than the saints, but no people are more unlike each other than the saints. And that applies to our recent popes. I think we've had popes, wonderful popes. Look at John Paul II, incredibly powerful prophet and teacher. Pope Benedict, probably the most brilliant theological, philosophical pope we've ever had in the history of the church. And now we've got Francis. We don't need any more documents. We've got Vatican II. We've got what John Paul II has written. We've got the whole legacy of Benedict. We need pastoral application of these things, and this pope is a perfect pope to do it. So all three popes, I think, have been wonderfully warm, engaging figures in their own way. But I think Francis is going to add a different dimension here. Raymond, let me just say this. It's a great time to be a Catholic. What other organization in the world is standing up for the fundamental values of truth and goodness and beauty and holiness in the family? It's the Catholic Church. And look at our leaders.
Very good.
It's glorious.
Father Fessio, Bishop Morlino, we will leave it there. Thank you for the analysis and for taking time away, giving us a little of your time. I have a brand new piece analyzing Pope Francis's trip in Rio that puts his comments in some context. I think you'll find it interesting. It's posted now on National Review online and at the National Catholic Register. I've linked it through my Facebook and Twitter pages. It's called The Messy, Alluring Grace of Pope Francis, and I think you'll find something there enjoyable. Make sure to check it out.